Here to discuss is former Congressional Budget Office Director Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Douglas, it is good to see you. As I said to my last guest in the last hour, I think we've overexhausted the term unprecedented, but it is apt in this case. A criminal investigation of a sitting Fed chair. I guess maybe the writing could have been on the wall, and it is still a stunning headline to read. From an economic and institutional standpoint, because I know there are a lot of legal experts, and by the way, we should note that Jay Powell also is a trained lawyer. There appears to be no legal standing for this case, but just the headline itself and the economic damage that something like this could do for the gold standard of the United States around the world. What is that? How alarming is that to you?
It's tremendously alarming. The Fed's independence is, as you mentioned, a bedrock principle of U.S. economic policy. It is one of the things on which the strong dollar, which has served as a reserve currency, is built. And investors' lack of confidence in the stability of the dollar would lead them to shy away from treasuries. That's bad for U.S. interest rates. That's bad for the pace of global trade, bad basically for the global economy. So this isn't a minor skirmish of a political nature off on the side. This is at the centerpiece of global financial markets, and it is central to the operation of things as they are now configured.
Let me pick up on that last line that we heard from Powell in that video, where he says this is about whether the Fed will be able to continue to set interest rates based on evidence and economic conditions, or whether instead monetary policy will be directed by political pressure or intimidation. Explain what happens to a country, to an economy, when the latter happens, because that's something that we've actually seen play out in real life. It's not a hypothetical.
We've seen this in Argentina with Peronistas and the takeover of the central bank, the issuing of money for political purposes and timing. You're going to go buy an election in blunt terms. We've seen it in Turkey, where Erdogan has cowed the central bank. The outcome in both cases is tremendous amounts of inflation, pardon me, enormous amounts of poor economic performance. And it's not a hypothetical for the United States. It wasn't that long ago, the 1970s, that then President Richard Nixon cowed the sitting chairman of the Federal Reserve, Arthur Burns. And Burns operated monetary policy for the purpose of Nixon's reelection. We saw sustained high inflation, sustained high unemployment in the 70s. And most of the efforts of the Federal Reserve since have been to avoid that kind of a situation.
Let's remind our viewers how this particular headline and narrative came about, and that was when the president really, as he's been expressing his frustration with Jay Powell for a number of years now, homed in on the cost of renovating the Federal Reserve building itself. There's video from, I believe, over the summer where the two men in hard hats were touring the facility, and the president took out a sheet of paper where he talked about how the expenses and projected costs have just increased significantly. You see Powell then confront him, saying those numbers are just wrong. First of all, federal projects, including the president's, and you're looking at the renovation of the White House right now in the ballroom, they routinely go over budget. But just that this alone is what Jay Powell describes as a pretext for this all. What do you make of it?
Well, look, if cost overruns were a criminal offense, most of Washington, D.C. would be in jail. I mean, that's the blunt reality of it. And this is not that. What the president did was, put on a show to try to intimidate Powell. He used the wrong numbers. He gave the cost of renovating 3 buildings, not 2. Certainly, if you're going to renovate 2 historic buildings that are adjacent to the Washington Mall and are built on top of some highly questionable asbestos foundations, it's going to cost a lot of money. We know that. These are historic buildings. So no one believes there's any substance. The question was, could they find a way to get Powell to do their bidding? They have not found a way. They've now decided to try to remove him one way or another. They've come to the conclusion the president can't fire the chairman of the Federal Reserve, so they've stopped that calls for that. And instead, they're now trying to get the Department of Justice to remove him on their behalf. So none of that is honorable, and none of it is something that should ever happen. There are two real great fallouts to this. I mean, number one is the impact on the Federal Reserve's policies, the perception of the global capital markets, and global and U.S. economic performance. And the second is the future of the Fed, which has been damaged already by the president's actions, and this will damage it further.
Yeah, I believe Janet Yellen this morning responded by saying we're sort of on the precipice of banana republic territory here. Do you agree?
Yes, this is what you see when the rule of law is simply discarded, and instead you use the rule of the authoritarian. That's what they're trying to do here. He is trying to intimidate Jerome Powell into going away, and there are some firewalls here I think it's important for listeners to know about. One firewall is, in fact, global capital markets. It is not in the president's interest to have long-term interest rates in the United States go up 50, 100, 200 basis points. So if markets react poorly, he's got a problem. The second firewall is the U.S. Senate, which has to confirm anyone he might choose to replace Powell. He could lose the votes in the Senate to get that done. And then it's a Pyrrhic victory. He gets rid of Powell and he can't replace him. Yeah, and then the third and the most important one is actually Powell himself. Powell can stay at the Federal Reserve through 2028, and he can make the president's life miserable in the president. So, right. He's on the board.
Yeah. His tenure as Fed chair ends in May, and he had been expected to just leave the Fed in total. But this may actually keep him on the board longer for this very reason, to see any sort of attempt to maintain the Fed's independence. Can I just ask you quickly on a separate note to weigh in on the president, a Republican, floating a one-year 10% cap on credit card interest payments and on housing by boosting large investors from buying, large investors from buying single-family homes, while also talking about buying $200 billion in mortgage bonds to lower costs. What do you make of that policy?
All three of those look like the panicked moves of a president whose party is up for re-election in the fall and is in trouble. None of those by themselves make any sense whatsoever. Some are incredibly counterproductive. The 10% interest rate cap will simply eliminate access to credit cards for the low-income, riskier borrowers that he's trying to help. And so these are counterproductive, sort of publicity-seeking efforts that allow a politician to say, gee, I'm on your side, but when push comes to shove, don't make things better.
Yeah, you, I believe on your blog, have described it as bad policy with superficial political appeal. Douglas Holtz-Eakin, thank you so much. It's good to see you. Come back.
Take care.